The moment I tore open that HOA letter, I'm pretty sure my blood pressure went through the roof. $10,000. That's what they claimed I owed them for letting my grass grow too tall for their precious aesthetic standards. 10 grand. For grass. Before we continue, drop a comment below telling me which country you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I stood there in my kitchen, afternoon sun streaming through the blinds, holding that ridiculous cream-colored envelope with the Lakeside Meadows HOA logo stamped on it, and I actually started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the whole thing was so ridiculous that laughing was the only alternative to screaming. I'd been on that property for 5 years, keeping to myself, maintaining everything, paying my dues, being friendly with the neighbors. Nothing complicated, just me, my truck, my aging dog Scout, and 20 acres of Texas land that my grandfather had spent his entire life working to keep in the family. That ranch meant more than just property to me. It represented legacy, roots, a promise that freedom was more than just a word carved into some monument somewhere. My grandfather used to say, "Don't ever let anyone fence your sky." I'd laughed about it when I was young, but standing in that kitchen with the HOA letter in my hand, I finally understood exactly what he'd meant. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They figured I was just another homeowner they could intimidate into doing whatever they wanted. What they didn't realize was that I had a law degree, military experience, and very little patience for people who hide behind paperwork and regulations. That evening, I sat out on the porch. The cicadas were loud enough to drown out everything else. That letter sat crumpled next to my beer. The breeze carried the smell of dust and cedar. And I remember thinking to myself, something's not right here. This wasn't the first time they'd find me. They'd already hit me with violations for my American flag being too big, for my pickup truck being visually disruptive, even for having old military memorabilia displayed on my porch. They said it was disturbing to the neighborhood aesthetic. That one nearly made me laugh out loud. Apparently, freedom didn't fit their landscaping vision. But this fine, this ridiculous $10,000 charge, that was something else entirely. That was a direct attack. Right after the sun went down, I heard someone knocking on my door. It was my neighbor, Michael Gwynn, a quiet guy who taught math and lived 2 properties over. He looked anxious, kept looking over his shoulder like he was carrying classified information. "Mason," he said, "you got a minute?" I let him inside, offered him a beer, which he turned down. That was typical Michael. Then I waited. He stood there for a moment before he lowered his voice. "You didn't hear this from me, okay? But I think they're specifically targeting you." At the last HOA meeting, after everyone else had gone home, I heard Victoria Lang, the HOA president, say, and I'm quoting her directly here, "We'll make it so expensive for Mason Cole that he has no choice but to sell." I didn't even react, just stared at him while I processed what he'd said. "You're absolutely sure about that?" I asked. He nodded. "Positive." And she wasn't kidding around. Her husband's development company has filed paperwork for a new resort right there on the lake. Your property's sitting right in the middle of where they want to build. After he left, I sat there in the darkness, phone glowing in my hand as I started digging through county records. And there it was, plain as day. Lane Development, LLC. Preliminary filings for a lakeside wellness retreat. The proposed footprint consumed several existing properties, mine included. My ranch had the best lake view, the exact spot they needed to make their project work. So that explained the sudden flood of violations. They wanted me gone. I didn't get any sleep that night. The following morning, I shaved, ironed a shirt, polished my boots until they gleamed, and drove over to the community center for the monthly HOA meeting. I hadn't been to one in years, but if they were going to talk about me, they could do it to my face. When I walked through that door, you could have heard a pin drop. Victoria sat at the head of the table, wearing pearls, perfect hair, designer suit, the complete suburban royalty package. She stopped mid-sentence when she spotted me taking a seat in the front row. "Mr. Cole," she said with that tight little smile of hers. "What a surprise. We were just discussing the landscaping issues on your street." "Yeah, I'm sure you were," I said, matching her tone exactly. "Actually, I'd like to discuss the pattern of harassment disguised as HOA enforcement that's been directed at my property." The entire room went silent. I laid everything out methodically, calmly, the timeline of fines, the photographs showing my yard perfectly maintained, the absurd accusations. Then I dropped the bombshell. The development paperwork filed by her husband's company with my parcel highlighted right in the center of their plans. Her composure cracked, just slightly. "That project," she said sharply, "has nothing to do with HOA business." I could see the lie written all over her face. Then she leaned forward, dropping her voice low enough that only a handful of people could hear her. "Frankly, Mr. Cole, your property's become something of an eyesore. The flag, the old military equipment, it's not exactly the image our community is going for, and some residents have raised concerns about your stability." The room went completely still. The implication couldn't have been clearer. I took a slow breath, stood up, and said calmly, "Mrs. Lane, if you're questioning my stability because I served my country, you might want to think very carefully about your next words." You could practically hear the air leave her lungs. She stammered something about not meaning any disrespect, but the damage was already done. People were whispering, looking at each other, seeing through her act for the first time. After the meeting ended, she walked up to me with that same fake smile plastered on her face. "You can't fight the rules forever, Mr. Cole. If you can't pay the fines, we'll place a lien on your property. Nobody wants to live next to a man who can't respect community standards." I leaned in close to her. "You're seriously misjudging who you're dealing with." That night, I called an old college friend, Elena Morales, who was now a property attorney who'd built her reputation taking down corrupt developers. I sent her everything I had: maps, deeds, letters, the development filings. She called me back less than an hour later. "Mason," she said, "only the front 5 acres of your property fall under HOA jurisdiction. The other 15 acres, they can't touch. And even better, they illegally modified the boundary 3 years ago without getting the required owner consents. If you're willing to fight this, you've got them backed into a corner." Her words ignited something in my mind. That back section of my land, the 15 acres they had no control over, sat directly behind Victoria's million-dollar mansion, separated by nothing but a thin line of mesquite trees and a shallow creek. She held her famous Sunday brunches back there, champagne glasses clinking by the pool. I called another old friend, Ryan Bishop, a former Marine who now operated a shooting range near Austin. "How difficult would it be," I asked, "to build a range on private land?" He laughed. "Legal or fun?" "Both," I said. By the next morning, I'd filed all the paperwork for the Cole Tactical Range, an outdoor training facility promoting firearms safety and veteran education. It was completely legal, fully compliant with regulations, and located exactly 800 feet from Victoria's backyard. Over the following week, I cleared brush, leveled the ground, marked out firing lanes. The sound of heavy machinery echoed across the lake. 3 days into construction, a white Mercedes came screeching to a stop at the edge of my property. Victoria stepped out, her heels sinking into the dirt. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she shouted at me. "Developing my property," I said calmly. "The part outside HOA jurisdiction. You can't put a shooting range here." "It's completely legal," I said, holding up the permit application. "Want to take a look at the paperwork?" She turned bright red, spun on her heel, and stormed off. That same evening, she called an emergency HOA meeting. The place was absolutely packed, neighbors whispering to each other, cameras recording everything. She launched into this dramatic speech about public safety and noise pollution. When she finished talking, I raised my hand. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "But for the record, my facility will meet all safety standards, operate only during daylight hours, and offer certified training conducted by veterans. Also, it's on land the HOA doesn't own." Half the room burst into applause. The other half just sat there looking stunned. The next day, her husband Richard showed up at my place. Expensive suit, fake smile. "Let's discuss this like businessmen," he said. "I understand you're upset. Maybe my wife went a little too far. I'll make the fines disappear and pay you double market value for the property, cash." I leaned back in my chair. "This land isn't for sale." He gave me this condescending smile. "You can't win, Mason. I have friends in every county office. And I have the law," I said quietly, "and a community that's starting to see who you really are." He stood up, adjusting his tie. "You'll regret this. Send Victoria an invitation to the grand opening," I said. From that moment forward, it was all-out war. Suddenly, county inspectors started appearing unannounced. My permits got mysteriously lost in the system. Anonymous complaints about unsafe conditions started flooding in. At one point, someone even blocked my driveway with orange barriers labeled "Road Closed." But Elena was relentless. She uncovered forged signatures, missing funds, even environmental reports that were plagiarized from other projects. We filed official complaints, and the county had no choice but to launch an investigation. Victoria doubled down with a smear campaign. The local newspaper ran a headline: "Veterans Shooting Range Raises Safety Concerns for Families." She was quoted talking about children being traumatized by gunfire. The reporter conveniently forgot to mention that her husband's company funded the paper's advertising section. Meanwhile, our website, HOA Hell Stories, exploded with anonymous submissions. Dozens of residents wrote about unfair fines, intimidation tactics, selective enforcement. We never specifically named Victoria, but everybody knew exactly who we were talking about. The narrative shifted fast. At the next HOA meeting, she tried to pass a new bylaw, a 300% increase in association fees for any activities deemed detrimental to community values. The room buzzed with tension. I let her finish her presentation, then stood up. "Before we vote," I said, pulling out my phone, "maybe everyone should hear this." I hit play. Her voice filled the entire room. "We need to push out the undesirables before they drag down property values." The crowd erupted, shouting, gasping, accusations flying. Victoria turned pale, then furious. "That recording is completely taken out of context," she yelled. But it was over. Her authority shattered right there in front of everyone. Still, she refused to quit. A week later, Elena called me. "Mason, those environmental studies for the resort, they're fake. They copied the data from another county's development. We brought that information to the County Planning Commission. They tried to delay things, citing watershed impact concerns, but Elena calmly presented our documentation, complete with the falsified reports and a draft complaint to state regulators. The commission folded immediately. "Application approved," the chairman announced. Outside the courthouse, Richard intercepted us. "You're making a mistake," he hissed at me. "This isn't about land anymore." Elena smiled at him. "Then maybe you should remind your wife that arson's a felony." He didn't respond, just turned and walked away. 2 nights later, Victoria showed up on my porch. No pearls this time, no calm mask. "You've ruined everything," she snapped at me. "You think this is over? I'll bury you." I didn't say anything, just pointed at the blinking red light on my security camera. The following morning, Richard called, his voice low and serious. "Meet me. Not at your place. The diner off Highway 9. 7 a.m. I brought Elena and a deputy, just to be safe." Richard looked exhausted, older than I remembered him being. He slid a folder across the table toward me. "She's forging documents, transferring assets. The resort was never really about a spa. There's an aquifer under your land. Clean water. That's what she's after. She'll destroy everything to control it." He offered to testify in exchange for leniency. I agreed, but with one condition: full transparency. Elena spent the next week organizing a town hall at the high school auditorium. We invited everyone: residents, county officials, reporters, anyone who wanted to come. The room was packed to capacity. Victoria and Richard sat in the front row, her jaw clenched tight, his expression completely blank. I opened things simply. This started as a property dispute, but it's really about who controls the truth in this community. Then Elena took over, unveiling document after document: falsified environmental reports, forged HOA amendments, embezzled funds. Finally, she played the footage from my porch security camera. Victoria's threats captured in full HD. The crowd turned. People started shouting questions, demanding answers. Victoria stood up, attempting to regain control of the situation. "You don't understand. This was for the community, to raise property values." I stepped forward. "You mean stealing land and silencing neighbors? That's your idea of community?" Her mask completely cracked. "That land has water," she blurted out. "Water we need for growth, for progress." Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "So you admit you targeted Mr. Cole's property specifically to gain access to the aquifer?" The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Victoria realized too late exactly what she'd just confessed to, on record, in front of officials and the press. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, yelling, "You'll all regret this." By the end of that night, the HOA had voted to remove her from the board. Michael was appointed interim president, tasked with rewriting the bylaws under proper legal supervision. For a few days after that, things were quiet. Too quiet. Then late one night, my motion sensors went off at the range construction site. Ryan called me. Movement near the equipment shed. I jumped in my truck and called Sheriff Wade immediately. When I got there, he was already on site. Fresh tire tracks, footprints, and a note pinned under a rock. Sunday won't happen. We set up surveillance equipment and waited. Around 2 a.m., a black SUV rolled down the access road. Headlights turned off. 3 figures got out. 2 men carrying gas cans and 1 woman giving orders. Even in the darkness, I recognized her posture. Victoria. I hit record on my phone and texted the sheriff. He arrived silently, lights off, surrounding the area. The second they started pouring fuel, he flipped on the lights and shouted, "Sheriff's Department, hands up." The men froze instantly. Victoria tried to run, tripped in the mud, and went down hard. When they put the handcuffs on her, she looked up and saw me filming everything. I'll never forget the look on her face. Disbelief, rage, humiliation, all mixed together. The charges came quickly. Attempted arson, criminal trespass, conspiracy. One of the men confessed immediately. Said she'd paid him $5,000 to make it look like faulty wiring. Richard filed for divorce the very next day and turned over even more evidence. Despite all the chaos, I went ahead with the grand opening that Sunday. The range was spotless, every line measured precisely, every safety rule clearly posted. The crowd was massive. Veterans, police officers, families, even some former HOA members who'd finally seen the light. Michael gave a brief speech about courage and community. Elena stood next to me, smiling like a proud general after winning a battle. Over the following months, the investigations tore through every corner of Harrington Estates. Fraud, bribery, forged permits, all of it came to light. The county dissolved the old HOA and formed a new one with proper oversight and accountability. When Victoria's trial came around, she sat there in a gray suit. No pearls, no entourage, nothing. The judge found her guilty on all counts, but suspended the prison sentence in exchange for restitution and community service. At my request, part of that restitution funded housing for local veterans. Her mansion was auctioned off, and my nonprofit bought it. We turned it into a retreat center for soldiers and first responders. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Now every Sunday morning, you can hear the echo of gunfire rolling across the lake. Not as an act of defiance, but as a sound of freedom. The range is thriving. The aquifer's protected. The community finally feels like an actual community. Sometimes people recognize me at the diner. "You're the guy who took on the HOA," they say. I just smile, because it was never really about revenge. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, this far, no farther. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. Bullies count on your silence. They expect you to weigh the cost of fighting back and decide it isn't worth it. But sometimes the cost of staying quiet is your dignity, your home, your peace of mind. So if you've ever had to stand up to people who think rules make them gods, tell me what you would have done. Would you have fought back? Would you have built the range? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment, because out here on the Texas border, freedom isn't just a word. It's a sound.